Andy Slaughter is here, Mark Byford. He's the Labour MP for Shepherd's Bush. And tell Mr Byford what you think about those obligations for due impartiality.
Well, I wrote to the Director General and I got a letter from Mark Byford yesterday in which he says that the BBC is obliged, has an obligation to have Mr Griffin on the programme.
Because of impartiality?
Well, because of impartiality. I wrote to him to say that my constituents, I represent Shepherd's Bush, it's one of the most multiracial and integrated areas in the country. My constituents and millions of people around the country are put at risk by the BBC's action. And his answer, and this is moral cowardice by the BBC.
Sorry, millions of people around the country are put at risk by Mark Johnson's...
Black and Asian people, Jewish people, Muslims around the country are put in fear and the threat of violence by giving a mainstream platform to a fascist like Nick Griffin.
But Nick Griffin's been on various mainstream platforms on the BBC, has he not?
But we know, as indeed the BBC...
And you weren't protesting then? You weren't saying millions of people around the country would be put at risk by the appearance on 5 Live Breakfast, the Today programme, etc.?
The Question Time programme is a flagship programme in which politicians, and Nick Griffin is a very plausible speaker, get to put their case. It is not, as the BBC was pretending yesterday, a forensic investigation programme. And I asked the question, the question that you've just asked.
So it's the fact that he's on Question Time.
It's the fact that he is being brought, as Jean-Marie Le Pen was in France, into the political mainstream, that the BBC is doing that. And I want an answer to my question. You just asked the same question, and he still didn't answer the question now. And the BBC is now hiding behind this cloak of obligation. Either it has the courage to say that it wishes to promote fascists and racists on the media.
Why is it promoting it? Why is it promoting it?
Of course it's promoting it. They have never had such an opportunity in this country. Even in the days of Enoch Powell and the National Front in the 1970s, the BBC, which is an important part of British public life, was not giving a platform to fascists in this way.
Why does the BBC only give platforms to people you disagree with?
One of my constituents has just said to me, would you invite the Ku Klux Klan on if they receive votes in an election? The other thing the BBC is doing, it is talking up the BNP. It's saying it got 1 million votes, which it didn't. It's saying it performed better in the elections this year, which it didn't. And it is giving, in order to cover up its own errors, it is giving the cloak of respectability to the BNP.
Mark Byford, talk to Andy Slaughter.
Well, the first thing I'd say is I'm not hiding at all. I'm on the air and I'm talking to you now. So the last thing we're doing is either hiding by not explaining our arguments, and secondly, the situation with the Ku Klux Klan and saying, will you have that on? Whenever there is a party that within the democratic framework and via the Electoral Commission is allowed to stand in elections around the UK and then generates a certain level of support such that, like with the BNP, they secured 2 MEP seats and the level of support that they did, it is then for the BBC to decide within the context of their obligations on impartiality, is it fair and right that they should now be invited for a place on that panel? And that is what they have done. It is for Mr Slaughter and for his parliamentary colleagues to say that if they think that their views or their stances should not be allowed within the democratic framework, to act accordingly. But once the BNP are allowed to stand and are allowed to get a certain level of support as they have done, the BBC, with care and soberly, have to look at the situation and say, no, it is fair and right that they are invited for an appearance on the programme.
Mr Slaughter, are you not trying to get the BBC to do your dirty work? You are a Labour politician. It is your party that is in government. You could stop the BNP going on Question Time tonight if you got together with your colleagues.
From Mark Byford is the BBC passing the buck. I suggest to Mr Byford and the other very well-paid executives of the BBC, they come out of their air-conditioned offices and their limousines, and why don't they talk to
got to do with it, but anyway.
I tell you why, because next door, on housing estates within a stone's throw from the BBC, where my constituents live, which are mainly black and Muslim estates, people will be in fear because of the room that the BBC is given to fascists to develop.
Why don't you ban the BBC from putting Nick Griffin on Question Time then?
Because
if you're that concerned
you know as well as I do, as happened with the ban on Sinn Féin earlier, that simply makes the BNP look to be martyrs. The BNP now is not the Jack Booty.
Hang on. If they're going to be martyrs, if they were banned, then they would be martyrs whether the government banned them or the BBC banned them.
you do not have to. I don't know whether you're now speaking for the BBC or whether you're trying to report this matter, but you do not have to. Whatever.
I've just said, you said, if you do, no, excuse me, Mr. Slaughter, let's be clear about this. You just said, if we do what we did with, if a government does what we did with Sinn Féin, i.e. ban them from media organisations, then we create martyrs. You're asking the BBC not to put Nick Griffin on Question Time. You will create a martyr.
Let me explain.
But you want the BBC to create the martyr, not the government.
Let me explain. The BNP today uses soft words.
I understand perfectly.
Talks the language of integration. It talks the language of identity rather than the language of racism. And that's how it has a plausibility. That's how it will try to come across to the people watching Question Time tonight. The law cannot deal with matters in that way, but sensible and rational people, who I hope are running the BBC,
the law can deal with matters in that way. If there's a will there.
The other thing you've done, and I heard Mark Byford doing it this morning, is this moral equivalence between the BNP and the Green Party. Well, it's not for me, as a Labour MP, to speak for the Green Party. The Green Party, some people may disagree with their views and say they're extreme. They do not discriminate against and victimise a substantial minority of people in this country on the basis of their religion or their colour. You have to come to terms, not with some esoteric argument in BBC dinner parties about freedom of speech here, arguments about what effect this has on people living, as I say, cheek by jowl with the BBC in Shepherd's Bush and many other communities around the country.
I just wonder, Mr. Byford, have you come out of Television Centre and spoken to members of ethnic minorities who live around this area in Shepherd's Bush?
Not today, no, but I can honestly say that throughout any year as head of the journalism of the BBC, I'm interacting with members of the public who in the end own the BBC. Of course, that's part of my job.
But I just wonder, have you specifically spoken to licence fee payers who are black and Asian about this issue of Nick Griffin on Question Time? Just out of interest.
Not this morning, no. But what I have had is responded to lots of audience reaction through the last few days, and I have to say, as has been demonstrated by one opinion poll that I saw as well done, is the large majority of those that have been contacting us have been in favour of him being allowed to be on the panel, not being in favour of the BNP, but in favour of him being allowed on the panel. And when Mr. Slaughter talks about the moral parallels with the Green Party, it's not about moral parallels, it's about the level of support that we had to recognise that then enabled them to qualify to be invited.
Which is no higher than it was 5 years ago. It is no higher than it was 5 years ago. And so you're saying, even if a very overtly fascist party, which wanted to do the sort of things that happened in Nazi Germany, got a certain number of votes, then the BBC would give it a platform on Question Time, its most prestigious political programme, in which people are not challenged in the way that they would be in a forensic interview. Come on, Mr. Byford, you're changing the argument all the time because you're wriggling now, because you know you've made an error of judgment here, as you did with the Gaza appeal, and as you continually do through editorial failure and moral failure at the BBC.
Well, I hear what Mr. Slaughter says, but I want to just emphasise that what I'm actually doing is remaining consistent to the arguments that we did right from the very start of the invitation.
Okay.
It is important to say that although that is Mr. Slaughter's view, and he's a Labour MP, Jack Straw will be on the panel tonight. Jack Straw is a senior cabinet minister because he and many of his colleagues believe that it is right to face up to the BNP on the panel and to be able to debate and indeed take part such that the democratic framework is allowed to happen. And that is how we have organised tonight's show.
You put Jack Straw in that impossible position, and now you're gloating over it.
Sorry,
I really think
say that again.
You have put Jack Straw in that impossible position. Now, I disagree with what Jack is doing. I think he should be with me and Peter Hay and Livingston outside protesting about this. But I understand why he's done it, because you are giving the oxygen of publicity and respectability to a fascist organisation. And you do have to live with that, Mr. Byford, as to your colleagues.
Well, the thing I'll live with, Mr. Slaughter, is to remain upholding the values of the BBC where impartiality is central to it.
Thank you very much, Andy Slaughter, Labour MP for Shepherd's Bush.